this is meant to be kept short. We decided, or we have been talking, I don't know if we've actually decided, to keep more of a, less of a lecture, more of a discussion in place with these reports and lectures. So it's a short, brief overview of the state and revolution, making, I hope, a few interesting points, and then I hope to turn it over to discussion. I'll point out the passages that are on that handout. I was hoping that would help facilitate discussion.
I didn't get a copy of the handout.
It should be coming around. Okay, so Lenin, The State and Revolution, the Marxist Theory of the State and the Task of the Proletariat in the Revolution. Written in August and September of 1917, this work was begun in Switzerland in 1916, while Lenin was in forced hiding. State and Revolution, like all of Lenin's works, sought to answer immediate concerns and questions which revolutionaries faced at the time. This is a tremendous work of theory, but that falls ancillary to the greatest worth, political organization and ideological clarification. So what were the questions that incited Lenin to write this text? The questions can be immediately found in the subtitle, The Marxist Theory of the State and the Task of the Proletariat in the Revolution. 1. What is the Marxist theory of the state? Which is important for two reasons. First, what was to be done with the state during and after the revolution? Second, what does this, a Marxist theory of the state, mean for the long-term reorganization of society? Second, what is the role of the proletariat in revolution? This second question is important for many reasons. Among them, organization and the tasks of the proletariat and the task to be completed by the proletariat being the most significant. These two questions are the central and guiding themes of state and revolution. In brief, the Marxist conception of the state emphasizes a twofold process: the establishing of the dictatorship of the proletariat by means of violent insurrection, which destroys the bourgeoisie state, and establishes a proletarian state, which is equivalent to the dictatorship of the proletariat. And afterwards, orients the state towards the gradual withering away of the state. Kind of redundant there, but the general idea being violent insurrection, establishing a new state, destroying the bourgeoisie state, establishing a new state, the proletarian state, the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is aimed at the eventual withering away of that state in hopes of communism.
Would you mind clarifying the dictatorship of the proletariat?
This is the overture. I'll get into that as it develops. No, not a problem. If we have questions, this is supposed to be discussions. If we have questions, raise them. Absolutely. Thank you. As a sound dialectical material analysis should do, Lenin's Marxist analysis of the state immediately offers the concrete direction the proletariat must take action. It's basically embedded in the dictatorship of the proletariat. The answer to what the task of the proletariat is in revolution is clear: to destroy the bourgeoisie state and establish the dictatorship of the proletariat. It's sort of self-referential, but pretty straightforward. This analysis will proceed to make these conclusions concrete and explain the various processes of first the state and its withering away, and finally the means and methods of the proletariat to accomplish that. Section 1, the state. What is a state? Most importantly, the state is by no means a power forced on society from without. Lenin, explaining a quote from Engels, summarizes. This is quotation 1 on the handout. Quote, "The state is a product and a manifestation of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. The state arises where, when, and insofar as class antagonisms objectively cannot be reconciled. And conversely, the existence of the state proves that the class antagonisms are irreconcilable. According to Marx, the state is an organ of class rule, an organ for the oppression of one class by another. It is the creation of order, which legalizes and perpetuates this oppression by moderating the conflict between classes." End quote. This passage makes two things clear. If the state is a product of irreconcilable class differences, it does not reconcile class differences. Very straightforward, but often missed. But instead, the state is used by one class to oppress another. Further, if the state now in place is a bourgeois state, a state that facilitates capitalist exploitation and domination, it must be destroyed for the proletariat to gain control. There's a handout right here. We just went over the first one. Josh, did you not go on? So just to reiterate that, if the state now in place is a bourgeois state, a state that facilitates capitalist exploitation and domination, It must be destroyed for the proletariat to gain control. Before turning to the destruction of the state, a few words on how the bourgeois state, the state which we currently live under, functions to oppress the working class for the profits of the ruling class. Last week, Josh gave a lecture describing socialism and revolution. He covered quite well the necessary mechanisms of exploitation under capitalism, which are surplus value. So if we want to rediscuss those, I say we do it at the end. Right now I'll focus primarily on the methods of repression that Lenin identifies in the State and Revolution, which are unique to the development of capital, not just the necessary foundation of surplus value. To oppress the working class and furnish the path to contemporary imperialism, the state employs several methods. The state establishes a public legislative power which does not directly coincide with the population. This legislative power has traditionally been some sort of parliamentary democracy, when it's been democratic at all. The ruling class uses parliamentary democracy, along with the democratic republic, by, quote, exercising their power indirectly, first by means of direct corruption of officials, and this is a passage from Engels, and he cites America as being the first to directly corrupt officials. And secondly, by means of an alliance between the government and the stock exchange, which Engels identifies at the time of writing this in 1891, as France and America, end quote. In short, the ruling class ensures the government established is serving the interests which it desires. Cheap labor under the bourgeois state, cheap labor, the protection of private property, and the ability to irresponsibly speculate the entire gambit of markets without repercussions, which is unique to imperialism, but that's what we're living under. As the financial crisis of 2008 made blatantly clear, cursory summarization, the banks and all of their subsidiaries were bailed out while social welfare programs were slashed. The government produced $700 billion and yet was not able to find any money for the people. Aside from allying the government with the stock exchange of course being the marketplace of imperialism, the state also disarms indigenous peoples and much of its own populations when possible, and institutes a police force and standing army. Thus, the military abroad and the police internal ensure the safety of the ruling classes. So not only is the base foundation of capitalism, the very way it goes about producing commodities, producing goods, exploitative in its use of surplus value, there are these additional methods of exploitation. Allying the government with the stock exchange, providing indirect representation through parliamentary government, which is held by the ruling class. None of us have access to run for president. We're not supported by lobbyists or big companies. We don't have a shot at really participating in this sort of democracy. And also the police and standing army. We are continually restricted and prohibited from bearing arms and forming any sort of people's army or militia, while we spend, I think it's like 68% of our budget on military defense and bombing poor countries. But of course that's not all. The oppressive apparatus of the state is pitched to the oppressed class as its beneficiary, as a natural state of affairs that requires what? Any shots in the dark? What does this state require? Along with everything else it's doing, it sells itself to the people and then says, and we're going to tax you. We're going to give state loans with a nationalized debt. So the corporations are free to continue their speculation, knowing the debt will fall firmly on the shoulders of the people, while at the same time taxing us to make sure we have enough money to make sure the corporations are okay. Having, quote, this is Lenin quoting Engels, having the public power and right to levy taxes, the officials now stand as organs of society, above society. Special laws are enacted proclaiming the sanctity and immunity of officials, end quote. This raises not only the question of destroying the state, the apparatus that is so oppressive, but also the privileged position of state officials under capital. And just to drive home exactly what Engels and Lenin mean by the official now stand as organs of society above society, think of the way that our elected representatives are immune from parking tickets and minor traffic violations, the way that their pensions are rolled over, they have a unique welfare structure. They have a different set of Medicaid, Medicare than we do. They have a whole retirement package. They're entirely exempt from the working class struggles, poverty, exploitation. The state, with its police, army, Sorry.
And not to mention that their elected terms are a lot less than what a typical person would work in their life. So like a person who works 20 years gets a pension package, elected official maybe like works maybe 4 to 8 years and gets the same benefits. So he's working technically less time than the worker who works hard. That's right.
Absolutely. That's right. It's a sweet gig for them. That's
just the way they utilize it.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a perfect example of how they're in society but above society, not accountable to us, and live a much more luxurious and beneficial life based on social programs that none of us have access to. This state, with its police, army, bureaucracy, and elitist, meaning minority class ideology, cannot serve the proletariat. Quote, this course of events, Lenin claims, compels the revolution to concentrate all of its forces of destruction against the state power and to set itself the aim not of improving the state machine, but of smashing and destroying it. End quote. With the destruction of the bourgeoisie state comes the dictatorship of the proletariat. So just to situate this and why, to many of us, talking about revolution, this might seem very blatant, sort of an obvious, yeah, we need to smash the state. Well, at the time, the opportunists and the anarchists were throwing around very different conceptions. The political climate at the time, the anarchists were saying, yes?
In reading some of this online, the Lenin, the state revolution,
yeah,
he uses the word opportunist a lot in what is a clearly very specific, in this case, technical term that I didn't find what the definition was.
And he doesn't provide a definition in the text. He just
well, I assume if I knew history better, it would be clear. Like, opportunist is what is named for a specific group of some sort that on the left that he doesn't like.
I gave a lecture a couple weeks ago on that exact topic, opportunism. And opportunism, if I may, isn't really a Marxist term. It is essentially something Lenin started to formulate to call out what were people in the Communist Party across Europe who started compromising and using opportunist tactics. For example, World War I, Kautsky supported war credits in Germany, so Germany could go to war, things like that. That's opportunism.
You want to clarify who Kautsky was?
Kautsky was a German social democrat in the Social Democratic Party. Yeah, so before...
punching bag for much of state revolution.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he mentioned Kautsky a lot. So the modern day equivalent would be like maybe even the Communist Party USA, who I remember was
and
even in American areas, even the Communist Party USA tells you to vote for Obama. That's like something.
Yeah, and further, almost every single labor leader and every single so-called revolutionary in the United States is an opportunist.
Well,
for the most part, vast majority.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say I think, and I don't want to correct Jacob. We might have different opinions on it. And I think what he's trying, and I could be wrong. I think the point he's trying to make is the leadership of the labor movement in general, right? Not every person called himself a revolutionary.
No. What I meant was leadership of the labor unions and other liberals who take on the name of revolutionaries, sometimes, but not all revolutionaries.
And to situate it within this precise context we're talking about, Kautsky didn't want to destroy the state apparatus. He thought that the revolutionaries should more engage the parliamentary system, try to get the majority, take control, and sort of slowly work in the system to reform the system. He didn't believe in absolute violence or any break with the state. He didn't want to offend the bourgeoisie. He wanted to slowly co-opt their parliamentary structure. Whereas Lenin's saying it's opportunistic to think that we can do that slowly and not just get rich ourselves or not just fatten our own bellies in these positions, where the real goal is to break and help the people. It wasn't so much about the leadership, it was about the revolution and a break with society and a restructuring of society, whereas Kautsky wanted the same society, same parliamentary democracy, slowly roll things over eventually.
Yeah, I was just going to say the reason why it's called opportunist too is that especially trying to do this gradual, well, we need to take the opportunities as they show up.
Work with these guys, not attack or...
people might hear with people talking about the Democratic Party. And I think that's actually one of the main reasons he calls them opportunists is because they're looking for parliamentary careers. You know?
Exactly.
I mean, these people are not revolutionary communists. And when I say that, I mean, I should say, they're not like genuine revolutionaries. These are people who are just constantly working in the state machine, and that's what they're interested in. Those are the people that they care about. That's what they want to change. Yeah, no shit. So.
Okay, I found that Lenin, it's funny and just dead on, but he kind of summarizes exactly why this movement, why the revolution itself under the Kotskis and the Mensheviks had been opportunist. He says, the 6 months between February 27th and August 27th, 1917 can be summed up objectively, summed up beyond all dispute as follows. Reform shelved, distribution of official jobs accomplished, and mistakes in the distribution corrected with a few redistributions. So instead of coming together and tackling the problems of the people and really restructuring society, they came together, they decided to shelve the immediate concerns for a later date, split up all the jobs for everyone in the party that won, and there are a few mistakes, somebody wasn't cut out for it, so then they redistributed jobs. Okay, so to pick up where I left off, with the destruction of the bourgeois state comes the dictatorship of the proletariat. So, as Josh asks, what is the dictatorship of the proletariat? It is the undivided power of the proletariat forming a new state apparatus backed by the armed force of the people. I'll repeat that one more time. The dictatorship of the proletariat is the undivided power of the proletariat forming a new state apparatus backed by the armed force of the people. So some of you may be thinking, wait, destroy the state and found another one. Yes, that's precisely what Lenin is saying. But not just another state, not just another bourgeois state, but a proletarian state. Or as we have said before, the dictatorship of the proletariat. This next passage is passage 2 on the handout. Lenin explains, it's kind of prolonged, but this is a reading of just one text, so I took some liberties with large passages. Lenin explains, quote, the proletariat needs state power, a centralized organization of force, an organization of violence, both to crush the resistance of the exploiters and to lend the enormous mass of the proletariat population in the work of organizing a socialist economy. In reality, this period of the dictatorship of the proletariat, inevitably is a period of an unprecedentedly violent class struggle, in unprecedentedly acute forms, and consequently, during this period, the state must inevitably be a state that is democratic in a new way for the proletariat and the property class in general, and dictatorial in a new way against the bourgeoisie. The transition from capitalism to communism is certainly bound to yield a tremendous abundance and variety of political forms, but the essence will inevitably be the same, the dictatorship of the proletariat. End quote. This long passage makes a number of incredibly important points. The proletariat state must be a democratic in a new way. That is, democratic centralism. Democratic centralism means a democracy where smaller communes are united in action with other communes, all owning and directly participating in the means of production and regulating forces.
What was that? You said it was a democratic.
Centralism.
Centralism.
And that is essentially the dictatorial mode of the state under the dictatorship of the proletariat. It is the proletariat on top oppressing the bourgeoisie, or the bourgeois, and slowly weeding out the bourgeois, hoping to turn society over to the withering away of the state. So democratic centralism means a democracy where smaller communes are united in action with other communes, they're all owning, so all of these communes, all of these settlements, towns, cities, whatever you call them, all own and directly participate in the means of production and regulating forces. This means abolishing the parliamentary system of minority representation and institutionalizing an entirely different governing system based on majority participation and action. Next, Lenin points out that the period of social transition will be violent. The proletariat cannot expect the ruling class to roll over and allow their pirated wealth to be freely distributed amongst the majority. This entails a level of dictatorial violence. Having been oppressed for ages, the proletariat must wrestle free the reins of autonomy and oppress the bourgeoisie who resist. Who resist being crucial. We don't need to just slaughter all of the bourgeoisie, all of the people willing to cooperate. But those who resist, those who disturb the new dictatorship of the proletariat must be dealt with. Thirdly, the transition from capitalism to communism will entail an abundance of political forms. It is now time to ask, what may some of these forms be? Section 2, the withering away of the state. Before I start, does anyone have any comments or questions?
Sure. Do you think that, or don't you think that would-be communists or would-be Leninists probably are reasonable if they think that if they were to join the vanguard, or whatever you call it, and in a hypothetical world, the Leninist movement actually succeeded in taking power, given the left's history and reputation for factionalism and infighting, they could expect probably to be smeared as, you know, counter-revolutionary after a few years, or bourgeois traitor or fascist, and get, you know, show trial and lynched or whatever. I mean, doesn't that seem pretty inevitable? When you have a dictatorship and centralized power, it's going to be the people who gravitate toward that, the steering of that dictatorship are going to be kind of sociopathic types. Yes?
Yeah, well, I'd say, and actually passage 2 kind of emphasizes this, but let's see, the dictatorship of the proletariat yields a tremendous abundance and variety of political forms. So like in our common, you know, sort of civil society, we always think, oh, dictatorship, that must mean everything I've ever been taught about communism, which is like one guy who makes all of these executive decisions and totally sublimates congressional and jurisdictional power, you know what I'm saying? Dictatorship in this very rudimental and fundamental sense simply just means to rule, right? And this is particularly why a lot of left currents and a lot of like revolutions manifest themselves differently, you know, upon different conditions and what have you. I think it would be, what's the term? And this isn't like a total, you know, stab at you by any means, but I just simply, I run into it a lot, and I think it's anachronistic, you know, to disregard the fact that a lot of historical movements have existed, you know, in various states of dictatorship. And again, in that root sense, which just means
well,
that
aware of the original meaning of the word dictatorship.
Dictatura.
I mean, you know, and I'm not like a newcomer to communist sympathy or anything, but still, I mean, people get purged, and people get, I mean, it's like, if the left as a movement has, I mean, I see this all the time, you go to the different factions, you read their sites, and there's so much vitriol and vehemence against, even though all these movements are relatively without power, and yet they still hate each other a lot. It seems almost as much as they hate the capitalists sometimes. And wouldn't it be natural to think that if once you sort of advocate violent revolution and going outside of constitutional and parliamentary society, it's sort of letting a genie out of a bottle, because if you can slaughter the bourgeois elements, or if you can, you know, you need obviously, well, we need a secret police, and we need, you know, these capitalist elements are always going to be trying to...
No, not at all. We don't need a secret police. No, I think what you're doing is taking particularly Stalin and the post-Stalin years and saying that that is the model for all hitherto communist or socialist societies, and I think that's a gross misreading of history. As the paper will explain, and as Lenin himself will explain, there are several lessons from the Paris Commune which Lenin identifies that Stalin never paid attention to. And those will come out in the paper. But no, a police force is strictly a state oppressive institution that is absolutely against what we're talking about here. And I've already mentioned the police and the standing army as being oppressive portions of the state.
Well, sure, but I mean, it's not just Russia. I mean, one of my favorite novels, I guess I should admit, is Homage to Caledonia by George Orwell, which talks about his experience going to Spain fighting. And he was in a militia, and he was fighting for, you know, he was an anarchist militia, but they were all, you know, on the same side fighting for the Republican cause against the fascists. But after he got back to Barcelona, because he got shot through the neck due to recuperating, but suddenly there was this, because there had been, you know, there was sort of a power struggle that arose, people who were perfectly, you know, sound in the sense that they had really no capitalist sympathies, but people started disappearing, his friends, they got thrown in prison, he barely got out of the country without, you know, being thrown into a prison without, you know, he was...
How is that unique? How is that unique to socialism, though? How does that not happen all the time in capitalism as well?
I'm not saying it would be unique to socialism. I'm saying that this would probably be a feature of any sort of extra-constitutional violent revolution, and so...
But it's part of the
Even
very
if-
core
even
fabric
if it's-
of American
Sure, I mean,
regulation.
no, I agree. It may well be a necessary evil, but
I don't even think it's a
people,
necessary
I think
evil.
when people bring it up, I don't know, they may have a valid point, but maybe they don't think it's worth it. I mean, I think it probably would be worth it, personally. Like, you know, did the average person in Russia benefit from the Russian Revolution, Absolutely, no, I agree with you there. But people who are more, I don't know, sensitive may see it as not worth it. The inevitable sort of violence some people get, you know, purged even though they really weren't counter-revolutionary, that sort of thing. Anyway, sorry to...
No, this is
No,
what we
it's
want.
totally relevant.
Yeah, this is what we want.
Well, I was just going to say, first off, and I know you're not new, but I was going to say my perspective on dictatorship. I think it's kind of what Brett was saying, which is the concept is not that it's a dictatorship in the sense that we know it, but a dictatorship of a class. And I know maybe you're aware of that. But what I'm saying is, what that means is we're creating a new state power, and a new class is going to rule it. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily not going to even be parliamentary, you know. The whole idea is that we would just have a different state that represents working people, in my view. So it seems to me like we are creating a whole new legal structure. We are creating a whole new concept of how the state's going to exist. And it is going to be much more democratic in general, I think, on every level, you know.
Sure.
So yeah, as far as like what happened in any country, like as far as like the Revolutionary Party, it seems to me it's not a question of it being all these different factions fighting against each other. The Revolutionary Party should be a fusion of all these different elements together into one mass party, you know, especially of working people, you know. And so there are going to be tendencies that fight amongst each other within that party. And at least in my conception, I think we should have probably a multi-party system. The Bolsheviks tried that, actually. They had the Bolsheviks and the left socialist revolutionaries and a whole smattering of smaller parties, you know.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting, is how exactly you implement this new state apparatus. Because, like, in state revolution, it seemed like Lenin, he's pretty down on parliamentary procedure in general. I mean, all the references that I came across to it were negative. But he also says that people like judges and policemen and everyone should be elected and they should be subject to recall. But he doesn't say how exactly we're going to implement that. That's the wonkish policy stuff that has to do with that.
That's the fundamental difference, though, is you have a parliamentary democracy. You're talking about capitalism, right? What's going on in Parliament is irrelevant. It's all what's going on with the capitalists. Really, the parliamentarianism is a show. It's a sham, you know. His concept is, this is the Marxist concept, is that this is where all the capitalists come together to decide policy for capitalism, you know. What we need is the same thing, but for working people, and in a state that's actually in the process of dissolving altogether.
And with officials that are immediately accountable to those who voted for them.
And
are
recallable,
at any time.
and not controlled by capital, not controlled by corporate money.
No special privileges either.
No special privileges, paid the same wages as workers. So I think this is a fundamental concept. That's where like a lot of the social democrats were like, well, what are you doing? You're extra legal. No, it's not extra legal, it's different legal. We're creating a whole new system for a different class, you know, in my view.
And it's born out of capitalism. It will develop with a parliamentary system. It will develop into democratic republic or any form of democracy. But the end goal to keep in mind is democracy goes with the state. I think
With the class, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, was it a question of how the dictatorship acts as such, you know, from one historical context to the next, or was it a question of violence?
Yeah, because that
was the core contradiction. Because forgive me, maybe I was like dodging the question, maybe I just misunderstood. So was it violence as such, or how the dictatorship, you know, exercises that violence and how they're comprised? Is that, just to get back to the core, you know, issue?
Wondering what you would say to the opinion that although the situation as it is now is not optimal, and trying to use constitutional or nonviolent means, or even say you can go extra constitutional, but nonviolent, may never work very well, but that, you know, some people might find that preferable to a violent revolution where it could work or it could go very badly, depending on who, you know, who's the charismatic leadership that came.
You get that the history of revolutions is honestly a history of establishing stronger bourgeois capitalist structures after revolutions. I mean, from the French Revolution onward, all the first the French Revolution did was ensure a stronger republic, or I mean a stronger monarchy, excuse me. I think that's a huge risk you have to take, and I think there will be people on both sides not wanting to and wanting to. I think for me, in my, I'd love to throw this out to everybody, but for me, it's not about violence in the sense of let's all just go crazy and hurt people. What was provocative about state revolution precisely was Lenin was responding to the opportunists, particularly saying the time is right, we need to strike, and he says elsewhere in What Is to Be Done, we don't strike blindly. The anarchists walk in with bombs and blow up cafes. That only serves to strengthen the resistance. That only helps unite people against the movement. We're not about blind violence. We're not about inopportune acts of, I don't even know what you call it, self-sacrifice. It's about being prepared to strike when we need to. And I don't think it's as clear-cut as some of us want violence, some of us don't. I think it's more, we don't want violence, but we should be prepared to use it when and where it is required.
Well, I was going to say, maybe I'm just reiterating like some of my other points, but like, you can look at the Venezuelan revolution as a great example where it was like, you know, virtually bloodless, you know, and I think that every revolution, again, kind of, and I said this already, mirrors its certain conditions. In Soviet Russia, they had nothing. You know, they started out from absolutely nothing. You know, like they couldn't read. You know what I'm saying? I would envision, if we were trying to draw like at least a contemporary, you know, lesson or example from this, I would say like look at the United States. Like there's tons of opportunities for revolution and overthrowing the capitalist class, and doesn't have to be, you know, sort of in the shadow of these hugely violent acts, if that's what we're trying to shy away from, you know what I'm saying? But I don't know, I think if one thing, history does teach us that all new societies are marked by very bloody revolutions, and all reforms are kind of, you know, mirrored after that revolution. It's sort of two sides of the same coin, and they complement and reflect each other, and so on and so forth. I don't know, that's just my 2 cents. Because I think the question of violence is always something that comes up. It's always a relevant question. So I didn't mean to shy out there or dodge.
No, and I hope we didn't shoot you down at all. That's a fantastic question.
Yeah, and not to monopolize time either, but I was just going to say really fast, as far as violence goes, I mean, I think the concept of violence is not necessarily the same thing with dictatorship. It doesn't mean violence right now. It doesn't mean like this one dictator. The idea is the capitalist government we have in this country is a dictatorship, you know. The violence aimed play against us to maintain capitalism is violence, you know. We're not talking about people just going in the streets and beating people with clubs. I think the idea is we maintain...
Structural.
Yeah, right, exactly. A systemic...
How do you get
you could say it's
your house, you know, because the cops will show up and, you know, use violence on you if you don't leave your house, right?
Well, I mean, who gets arrested on cops is like people who are, you know, knocked over a gas station or doing drugs. But who's not arrested on cops is the super rich that knock over countries and steal the resources and pump millions of pounds of drugs. Those are the people that should be getting that kind of quote-unquote violence, as in repression, going to jail, you know, getting arrested, you know, instead of like, oh no, we can't do anything to you, you know, you're asshole,
paying our paychecks.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
And not to mention, of course, all the negative effects of the industrial agriculture on the nation's health, and the depression of immigrant labor in a lot of the factories that don't produce that food. Harsh treatment of animals in the factory farms as well. I mean, it's it's violence, but it's in a way kind of
Legal.
Yeah,
It's just
legalized
that-
violence.
it's
And
just
the
normalized
gov-
and standardized.
Yeah, and the government is indirectly supporting that and continuing to perpetuate that cycle. I mean, people are being like, having their rights taken advantage of, and also, we're getting fatter. And, yeah.
Violence to our guts.
Apparently,
Guilt.
we can't sustain
We did an introduction. This is Kyle, by the way. He's awesome. He's in my sociology class.
Quick question, who's your favorite Dragon Ball Z character?
Team Gohan.
Awesome.
Yeah, I
Mine's
think
Vegeta.
just like the kind of point that a lot of people are getting at is that the state is violence, and the violence is always present, right? And with the bourgeois state, right, the violence is just directed at us. It may not always be apparent, but as you can point out, if you try to deviate from the established rules that capitalism, operates by, you will see that violence rather quickly. And of course, that violence doesn't just get concentrated on its own citizens, it occurs abroad. It occurs in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Libya, it occurs in all these places, right? So this violence is always happening, and the fact that we're saying that, like, yes, this violence is always happening, we just want it to not be directed at us. We want it to not be directed at working class people. We want it to be directed at the people who have perpetuated this violence against us, and would continue to if we tried to, reorganize society for our own benefit. So it's not a matter of there being, no violence as opposed to a violent revolution. It's a matter of whose side that violence is on.
Any closing comments before I move on? That was a great discussion. That was fantastic. Keep it coming. So yeah, section 2, the withering away of the state. The withering away of the state is a process of transition that Lenin, citing Marx, identifies in several stages. First, socialism, or what Marx calls the first, quote, the first phase of communism, end quote, and the successive developments that allows the state to slowly wither away. Quote, owing to the conditions of capitalist exploitation, the modern wage slaves are so crushed by want and poverty that they cannot be bothered with democracy, cannot be bothered with politics. In the ordinary, peaceful course of events, the majority of the population is debarred from participating in public and political life, end quote. The dictatorship of the proletariat must, first of all, learn to become democratic. We must first learn to bother with social organizations, administration. In a word, we must first learn politics. We, the working class, or petty bourgeois students. Marx, analyzing the Paris Commune and drawing the logical conclusions therefrom, saw several ways in which this process must begin. This is quote number 3 on the handout. Quote, the first decree of the Commune was the suppression of the standing army and its replacement by the armed people. And the suppression of the standing army would also include the police force, which Thiers took with him en masse on his escape. Second, the Commune abolished officialdom, or the privileged status of public servants, by reducing their wages to those of working wages. Further, the Commune made all representatives of whatever kind, social, religious, political, responsible for their actions and revocable at any time, end quote. The Commune, according to both Marx and Lenin, furnished the material to understand how the first phase of communism, as socialism, would begin to undo the years of bourgeois ideology and oppressive government. In short, the Commune began the process of reorganizing the state along the lines of transforming capitalist private property into social property and defending their monumental achievement. Marx understood that just because the proletariat had won in the initial revolution, the dictatorship of the proletariat, quote, does not immediately create the economic prerequisites for communism, end quote. The first phase of communism, or socialism, is the building block for the education of the proletariat and the terrain for finalizing the defeat of the bourgeois. It is a period of experimentation, growth, hard work, and final tastes of violence. However, this first phase of communism, Lenin believed, could be transformed further still, and must be transformed further. Remember that the state is an oppressive apparatus, rising through the stages of history as a result of irreconcilable class differences. Quote, only communism makes the state absolutely unnecessary, Lenin said. For, quote, there is nobody to be suppressed, nobody in the sense of a class, of a systematic struggle against the definite section of the population. We are not utopians. This is a lengthy quote, so bear with me. We are not utopians and do not in the least deny the possibility and inevitability of excesses on the part of the individual persons or the need to stop such excesses. Excesses could very well be overzealous violence. In the first place, however, no special machine, no special apparatus of suppression is needed for this. This will be done by the armed people themselves, as simply and as readily as any crowd of civilized people, even in modern society, interferes to put a stop to a scuffle or to prevent a woman from being assaulted. And secondly, we know that the fundamental social cause of excesses, which consists in the violation of the rules of social intercourse, is the exploitation of the people. It is their want and poverty. With the removal of this chief cause, excesses will inevitably begin to wither away. We do not know how quickly and in what succession, but we do know they will wither away. With their withering away, the state will also wither away. The state will eventually be able to wither away completely when society adopts the rule, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. That is to say, when people have become so accustomed, and accustomed is the key word here because Lenin does see this as a prolonged process of habituation. He specifically cites the need for further generations to carry on the struggle, to be born without the hindrances of bourgeois ideology, as so many of us are. That is to say, when people have become so accustomed to observing the fundamental rules of social intercourse, and when their labor has become so productive that they will voluntarily work according to their ability, there will then be no need for society in distributing products to regulate the quantity to be received in each. Each will freely take according to his needs. To conclude, I think this is the last quote on your handout. Until the higher phase of communism arrives, the socialists demand the strictest control of society, and by the state, over the measure of labor and the measure of consumption. I read that rather poorly, so let me reiterate. Until the higher phase of communism arrives, the socialists demand the strictest control by society and by the state over the measure of labor and the measure of consumption. But this control must start with the expropriation of the capitalists, with the establishment of workers' control over the capitalists, and must be exercised not by a state of bureaucrats, but by a state of armed workers. End quote. And then I was hoping from here just to turn it over to this guy.
Awesome. Cool.
That's okay.
So what do the Trotskyists have to say about permanent revolution? What is permanent revolution? Does it apply to the withering of the state?
Look how smiling you get when I ask these questions.
Because
You're always smiling.
I've heard the responses, and I want to know, like, I think within Maoist trends, and I would uphold this, it seems like the very base of the Cultural Revolution was challenging the Central Communist Party head, and it seems like that's a concrete, historical piece to shed light on the current situation. Does permanent revolution, would that theory be sympathetic to any aspects of the Cultural Revolution or anything like that? Or is it just Mao's power grab?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both, honestly. I think there was actually an element of a political revolution going on in China. But let me just say, I think there's something a little bit different. I have a different conception, I think, of socialism than maybe Maoists would. I don't think that there was socialism in China. I think that what there was a transitional regime, kind of what Lenin talked about as what the Soviet Union was. It wasn't socialism yet, because it couldn't even match the basic level of productivity of capitalism in the Western countries. It was and when I say that, I don't mean as far as like you can produce tons and tons of shit, you should just produce all this crap like we do in this country. What I'm saying is, to produce the same things, he took way more labor, And it shows, it was some of the, you can say backwardness, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, backwardness of the country, because it had not developed along capitalist lines the same way that Western Europe had. So this is what Lenin is talking about in Russia. He says this is not a socialist country. We are, at the very most, like he even said at one point, we're a capitalist country without capitalists, which is not entirely true, but there's a good point to it, which is there's all these capitalist measures and methods that still existed within the country. I think China was far, far behind in the level of technique and technology of Russia, and I think that what grew up there was, in my opinion, a dictatorship far worse than you know, what Lenin and the Bolsheviks represented. And I think at a certain point it broke from the masses and became kind of its own self-perpetuating bureaucracy. And so what I think is that there was a political revolution, just like what I consider what happened in Hungary in 1956, or in Czechoslovakia to a certain extent in 1967. To a certain extent, I think that happened in China with Mao. There was a lot of, like Greg talks about, the new bourgeoisie that was growing up, and that Mao led like a revolution against them. I think this is actually, to a certain extent, kind of true. There were a lot of aspects of a political revolution in what Mao was doing. I think the problem was it was led by Mao. And so what Mao actually wanted wasn't a political revolution, in the sense that he wanted a political revolution that led to his coming to power. I think after he took power, during the Cultural Revolution, he very quickly took that same social base and sent them off into the mountains or off into labor camps or whatever, completely got rid of them as much as possible. And a lot of people who had been part of that movement had themselves been repressed. But I agree to a certain extent. I think that the masses themselves did want a political revolution against the bureaucracy in China. I do think that they took Mao's Cultural Revolution and tried to do it to a certain extent. They tried to do it 10 years before when when Mao called for, or it wasn't 10 years, it was like 7 years before, when he called for, 1,000 flowers blooming, which led to a whole bunch of intellectuals talking about the conditions that existed in China, and of course getting arrested for doing that. But as far as permanent revolution goes, I think that permanent revolution is not necessarily that. Permanent revolution is kind of the same. It's part of that same concept of moving gradually from a dictatorship of the proletariat to communism, where there's no state, where there's no classes, people are working according to their ability, getting according to their need. But it also, with Trotsky, it talks about, it takes the concept of, like, who should you, if you're in an oppressed imperialist country, who are your allies, you know? And the concept is the capitalist class within these countries is incapable of leading a revolution the way that the capitalists did in Western Europe. This is a social democratic idea, that the capitalists within the imperialized countries would be able to lead that revolution. The problem is they're tied to imperialism. They're the agents of local imperialism. And even when they pretend that they're revolutionary, they're actually secretly the fifth column within the revolution. They're always the most conservative. And we see that in Venezuela, I'd say. Within the PSUV you have, and we work within the PSUV as lucha de clases. The bureaucracy that's grown up in there is largely capitalists that have become rich under Chavez. And we see that they have largely taken over the reins of power within the PSUV. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be there and still be fighting for the things we fight for. The point is, the capitalists are not the revolution. We have to break from the capitalists fundamentally in even the most backward of countries and fight for these four things that he's talking about here. And I would say what's going on in Nepal is a good example of what happens if you don't have that concept. Right now, where Prashandra is giving all the weapons away to the bourgeois army and preparing for another split like happened 10 years ago in Nepal. This is the problem. You've got to break from the capitalist class, break from parliamentarianism, break from opportunism, form a new state entirely. Not try to use the reins of power of capitalism, because they will come and crush you.
Totally. So when historically have we seen permanent revolution concretely be enacted in a revolution movement?
I would say that you've seen it in a negative sense everywhere that a revolution's been overthrown. Every time you have any kind of revolution that's halfway to power, they always get thrown out of power, usually by the capitalist state that's been newly created. The Sandinistas are a perfect example of that, where they destroyed the bourgeois state of the dictatorship and proceeded to create a new one. And what ended up happening was who threw them out? The bourgeois state they created. And not only that, the bourgeois state was also the ones that was leading these deadly militias against the very Sandinistas that had taken power. I think in a negative sense, you can see time and time again as these middle-class leaderships attempt to lead a revolution without getting rid of capitalism, they are overthrown. This has happened in Grenada with Maurice Bishop. This happened in Burkina Faso with Thomas Sankara. Throughout all of Africa, the leaders either became awful capitalist dictators or themselves were overthrown in a coup.
So is my understanding of Trotskyism, at least to some small element, correct? When my idea of it was that, like, say, that there's been a socialist revolution in your country, and they've set up a new state apparatus, and they've got to get economic command economy thing going, right? And so you're a worker, and it turns out your conditions are just as bad as they were before. Now the party line might be, well, that's because this is a transitional time. You have to buckle down for the greater good. With Trotskyism, the permanent revolution idea would be to you give the finger and you keep on fighting against whatever new state apparatus has been set up. If the conditions are just as bad as they were before, is that what?
If it's unreformable, yeah. Like we worked within the Communist Party as an opposition from 1927 until 1933. We didn't break from the party. We didn't call for an end of the party or for an overthrowing of the Soviet state until, in our view, Stalin actually helped lead to the rise of Hitler with the third period stuff by having them separate off from the Social Democrats, which in reality, in my view, was actually, it was when he was doing overtures to different imperialist powers, he's just playing for his own, he's using the international as his own personal border guard, So we actually formed, if it's unreformable, yes. But we worked as hard as we could within the official communist structures if possible to try and change them. But yeah, absolutely. I do think, however, that you have to keep in mind the conditions that exist. I mean, the reality is it's not easy. There's a whole lot of, especially in a backward country where, and I say again, I'm not saying this in a pejorative sense, but in the sense of like not as developed. You're primarily peasants, and this is what Lenin talked about. It's a different situation than exists now in this globalized economy where everyone's a worker, So, you have to take that into you have to take everything into consideration, It wasn't until not one single organization of the Communist International opposed the line that Stalin and the leadership in the Soviet Union took when Hitler came to power, after he came to power, that we made the determination that working to try and reform this is absurd. It couldn't happen. It's going to lead to more fascism if we do. So. Sorry to the diatribe, but yes, it was specific to the Trotskyists. So.
And other people were interested in Trotskyism before you guys came in, so who's going? Although, to be fair, I didn't ask for your intent of Mao.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Does anybody else have any other questions? Is anybody skeptical about the withering of the state concept?
Yeah, I did read some of its most flowery passages. Yeah, the part about it, he was getting to his need and, having the ability to not even worry about distributing goods because people will be so responsible we can distribute themselves. I mean, that is the goal, but... I think it's not an accident that the most popular, in the popular consciousness, the version of communism, even though it's not called that's the most popular, is Star Trek, right? Where there's no money, I mean, it's really utopian stuff, right? There's no money, everyone can just go follow, do what they want. Yeah, post-scarcity. Well, it seems to me that, in my view, I guess I'd be a little skeptical of the whole withering the state thing. I think it could only happen if there really was post-scarcity type thing. And I don't know, it depends on how technology goes. What's that called? Historical materialism? I guess I really am a historical materialist. If someone invents some sort of genetically engineered bacterium that can, suck carbon dioxide and turn it into motor oil, then, there will be a post-scarcity, probably utopian communists, to us utopian in the far future. But if there is no such technology, and if the oil runs out, then probably I would be extremely skeptical, I guess.
Or we could just not base our economy on those kind of things like fossil fuels.
Well, yeah, but in that case, you go back to, I'm skeptical of the ability of solar panels and windmills to power any sort of industrial civilization. It would be 18th century technology we'd go back to, which in that case, it may no longer seem at all possible to have, everybody take what you need and no more state, and the state withers away.
Last week at the steady state economy panel discussion, he was saying that a steady state economy would be incompatible with capitalism. And there's this book by Wendell Berry called Home Economics. There's a chapter called Two Economies that's kind of the same idea as a steady state economy, where there's the greater economy of the living world, and then there's an industrial economy. He said the industrial economy is like a fund that it's not replenished and you just draw from it till it's gone, and that's represented by like mining and fossil fuels. And a couple years ago there was a Nobel Prize winning article called The Tragedy of the Commons, and this idea of the industrial economy raises some of the same problems as the tragedy of the commons, how people in their own rational self-interest take a lot.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it is easy to answer. I mean, not necessarily easy, but it seems rather straightforward to me to think in terms of concrete action, sticking with our historical materialism. Which conception of society is more likely to be able to avert a major disaster in the environment and the economy? Is it capitalism, which we've seen consume the environment without any sort of regard and produce repeated crises, which we always forget. Crises aren't a bad thing. Michael Prenti made this point, and I thought it was just spot on. Crises aren't bad things for capitalism. It's a surplus of labor. There are 12.5 million people unemployed here. Tina just barely got a job today at minimum wage and was like ecstatic. She was going, they were asking for experience at the deli counter. Like they wanted you to have a year experience with a deli slicer. I mean, it's a great thing for capitalism. But what's more likely to answer these problems? A sort of planned economy, be it socialism or another variety, or the same stuff we've always got? I think it is easy. I think it's a straightforward analysis that we have to start thinking in terms of we are running out of resources, we are running out of time. Capitalism can fail, it is failing. How do we bring it to its knees? For me anyway. So.
Well, changing people's attitudes, perhaps.
Absolutely, it has to be.
I think another thing is that going along with like the idea of like a post-scarcity society, I mean, you may think that we were going to need to invent like some sort of thing that, you know, on an enterprise that like materializes food for us, but there can be other conceptions of that, right? Yes. I mean, like, who's to say, like right now, like the reasons for a great amount of scarcity is that capitalism is destroying ecosystems. It is destroying like the places where we are able to generate things to benefit society. And it does this not to produce goods for society. It does this, you know, to produce things for novelty, you know, for profit, for all this kind of thing. So I mean, you get a whole bunch of
It's all about
peripheral?
Superfluous things that people don't need, that don't really address people's needs. So you have people, you know, even going around in, you know, third world countries, you know, talking on cell phones while they're like starving to death, you know. Right. So like, yeah, it produces all this shit and it's destroying the world to do that, but we don't need that.
And think about all the hundreds of billions of dollars wasted on advertising these products, creating the need for that. Yeah. And not to mention that a lot of these companies, and especially, you know, the change in people's attitudes and the rising generation, fast food industries are terrible at this. They have actually had programs and training plans to advertise to young kids because that's when they're the most vulnerable. And in fact, I remember reading in Fast Food Nation how they use these tactics. Like this one person was talking about how they can turn kids into consumers by like 7 different types of, like, through nagging essentially. They want kids to pull on their skirts at the supermarket to buy them the high sugar frosted cereal when it absolutely has no nutritive value. That's made of processed ingredients made by labor that's cheap and government subsidized. It's a crash going to happen, I say.
So yeah, it brings up the issue is if we weren't, you know, producing all of this stupid crap that is incredibly environmentally destructive, you know, that what kind of post-scarcity society could we open up by, you know, replenishing the bounty that is already, you know, that is in nature, right? Instead of you know, depleting it.
last week, the contemporary Marxist who came from the University of Maine was saying, well, he's talking about trans-individuation. He's saying in capitalism there's an increased exploitation of the trans individual and increased commodification of a pre-individual that desires for the market. There's a continental philosopher from Austin, Texas, who wrote about abstract greed, which is more cultural, and that, you know, people aren't greedy because they actually want more than everybody else. They're greedy because stuff's advertised and in fashion and accessible.
It's a token of success. Plenty of people own every single technologically advanced product on the market and cannot use a third of them.
Can I use what?
A third of the products. A perfect example, my stepfather owns an iPad because it's in vogue. He owns several iPads because there was the iPad and then the 2. And he owns all the iPhones. He can operate the basic functions. He can jump on the internet and send emails.
And there's the, you know, the quintessential old ladies or, you know, certain people who like in older age brackets who have no idea how the hell it works. And I mean, what's the point?
That's the interesting part about the pre-individual that Jason Reed was talking about, is that you start to identify, instead of who am I, looking intrinsically to my social relationships, the way I treat other people, the career path I follow. The pre-individual is that consumer looking at the market saying, now what labels am I going to identify myself with? Who am I? What do I wear? Like, what brand am I? Am I Nautica or am I Nike? Or am I...
And what do you eat?
Oh yeah, what do you eat? How do you dress? What do you do? I mean, yeah, the choices become not social evaluations in terms of real people engaging with others, but in terms of what brands are going to interact with what other brands.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I actually agree with you as far as scarcity. I don't think there's ever going to be a time you can have genuine communism without an end of scarcity. And I think you're right about the pre-individual. I also think scarcity is a fundamental part of why people are greedy, because they don't have enough. You know, if you have enough, and if we've eliminated the cultural barriers, cultural and you know, physical and social barriers to you know, just taking what you need. You know, I mean, we have way more than we need in this society. You know, way more. And it doesn't mean that we individually have it, but it's somewhere. It could be in some warehouse waiting to be sold to somebody, you know, but no one has enough money to buy it. Whatever it is, that we produce way more than we consume, and we have to, because that's how capitalism works. That's how surplus value exists, is that we produce more than we consume as workers. So
you advertise to drive the demand of those products, saying you need that surplus.
yeah,
You need that new iPhone because you are not in stream without it.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, it gets to ridiculous levels where people are getting iPods and losing their homes.
Yeah,
But I mean,
technology.
which it's just totally absurd. But it's like, it's also just having that scarcity. I think that once we get to a level where the scarcity is gone, and I think technologically we're probably already there, you know, it's just a question of distribution, you know.
Sure, I mean, it would be physically possible to eliminate poverty. I mean, so long as the oil holds out anyway.
Well,
that's my thing, is I think socialism, or socialist movements need to be ready for, I mean, need to be resilient enough to survive even if, like, the electricity goes, or no, even aside from, you know, peak oil, like Facebook, say, being in the stream, you know, what, if all socialist, you know, clubs coordinate through their Facebook pages with their mobile phones, and then one day that gets shut down because, you know,
like they do it in San Francisco, just
exactly.
like they're doing.
But I mean, like on a widespread level. I mean, we don't want to get so ingrained in the habit of relying on it that, you know, we're paralyzed if it gets shut down or denied.
Although the flip side of that is that now there's all kinds of technology itself, to a certain extent, is destroying capitalism. I mean, it's destroyed the music industry. You know,
yeah.
The reality is we can actually, I mean, revolutions have happened because of technology to a certain extent. I mean, I think it's been overblown, like with Tunisia and Egypt, but it certainly was a component of it. I mean, and so I think but my point is, it's a double-edged sword, and ultimately, it also is a big source of overproduction for capitalism. You know, so I mean, there's all kinds of contradictions that are unsolvable. That technology actually just makes it worse and worse and worse. You know, and hacking. I mean, there are people who can hack into systems and just fucking do whatever. You know, so I don't know. I just think, and I don't think that technology is going to be the savior of everything. Well, probably to a certain extent I do, but to a certain extent it's not. To a certain extent, it's about just changing our cultural values, changing the social and political barriers that exist in society, and the redirecting distribution.
And not to mention that technology itself is also insinuated. I mean, I keep talking about food production because I like to eat, and where your food comes from is really important because you like to eat and live. But yeah, I mean, technology in itself, yeah, is a good thing, but I think especially in the food production, we've become so reliant on it, you know. Growth hormones, soil fertilizers, chemicals added to the foods, you know, to make it taste better even after all the stuff's been taken out of it. And technology itself can be taken, has been in this area, I think it's been taken too far. And I think some more simplistic attitude or more careful attitude towards it and more reliance on those natural things is better than not too much.
Yeah, and I'm interested how you're going to respond, but I was reading out of this woman's article. I can't remember what her name was. I think Anne Robertson. She wrote an article back in 2001, and one of her things was, you know, using foods that are organic and how that's socialism. And her idea was it's ridiculous at first, but then when you actually look at why organic food is beneficial over the pesticide and different modified foods, it is beneficial for us and it's beneficial for society, right? And so it's about feeding people and feeding people the best way possible, which capitalism won't do.
Yeah, and Jacob Scope Farms talked a lot about how the more locally and the closer it's grown to you, the better it is for you. And the reason why some of that food's so heavily treated in the first place is because it has to travel 1,000 miles from the farm to the supermarket shelf.
And capitalism loves that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Totally. Well, just to drive it home and kind of go back to Charles' lecture, I think why the development of a state is so important is because if we look at all of these other capitalist nations that, you know, their food supplies run out, or you know, their economy goes to shit, or they have some sort of economic crisis, the ones that are still alive are the ones that still have a strong state apparatus, at least a working apparatus, let's say that, so it's not polemical or whatever. We can look at Cuba, who's been under economic stranglehold for decades now, and they're the only Latin American country that doesn't have child malnutrition. I mean, and just in regards to socialism as a whole, I think everyone has a similar recurring theme passing around here, and that is we should utilize, you know, the use value in commodities. I know I said this last week, but it needs to be emphasized. You know, we don't need Furbies. We don't need, you know, 5 iPods. What we need to do is feed people. What we need to do is give them free education. What we need to do are end the wars and end the mass suffering, you know, of people worldwide. At least that's my views of Marxist Lenin.
Real quick, let's we'll wrap this up at the hour, and if anybody wants to talk after that, but we'll call the meeting closed.
The camera's actually running out of batteries, so I'm gonna shut it off.